Jonah Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think perhaps I need to declare a potential conflict of interest. As far as I know, I'm perhaps the only person speaking on this who has a qualification in social work. I may be corrected on that, but I have to say, I have a social work degree, Mr Speaker. I am not registered. I'm not a registered social worker. I have practiced social work, and while some might say that I'm currently not practicing social work, I think actually all of us as MPs, when we have constituents come through our doors, at times find ourselves practicing what would often be referred to as social work in terms of the way that we have to deal with some of the constituents that come through our doors. Mr Speaker, the social work profession for a long time has been a very broad one. I took the liberty of looking at that fine institution of Massey University's website this afternoon to look at the kind of careers that they said a degree in social work may offer you. It's a long list, but it can be read reasonably quickly. Hospitals and primary health care, mental health and addictions, voluntary and community organisations and government organisations, child protection, youth justice, housing, offenders, residential care, management and supervision, tertiary education, community work and community development, refugees and migrants, schools. Now, Mr Speaker, the kind of things that I've heard this afternoon might make me think that social workers only practiced with children and young people, or that perhaps they only worked for the Child, Youth and Family Service, because much of the focus of the debate this afternoon has been in that area. And so, Mr Speaker, I would say that I absolutely endorse the idea that people who are working with particularly vulnerable people should have some level of professional accountability. They should perhaps be registered. And if I thought that this bill was going to actually achieve what we want it to achieve, I would support it. But, Mr Speaker, it's not going to achieve it. It's so universal, it's so all-encompassing, it's so broad that really it's not necessarily going to achieve what it is that the intent seems to be behind it. Of course, we want children and young people who are having social workers working with them, or older people or vulnerable people of any kind, to be cared for appropriately. Of course, we don't want any children or young people to have the experience that the previous member referred to. This may or may not fix that. Because actually, as we know, there's still, from time to time, even with registered social workers, has been disciplinary action and people have been deregistered. We have doctors who have all sorts of professional boundaries that they have to adhere to, and that still doesn't stop people from practicing badly. So this won't necessarily fix all of our problems. Mr Speaker, there is at the moment, I'm not sure how this would work. If I was to leave Parliament tomorrow and perhaps get a job with the Alzheimer's Society and go and work running a day program with Alzheimer's patients, I think, given that I've got a social work degree, I could pretty confidently say I would be practicing social work. If this law was to pass, I wouldn't be able to call myself a social worker because I wasn't registered, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily the intent. Perhaps it is the intent, but we've got to look at this carefully. This is a broad way that things are operating. Yes, at some point we need to look at mandatory registration in certain areas of social work, perhaps. Because, let's face it, in other professions, you do want to know there are professionals looking after you. I said to someone today, when I go into hospital, I don't mind if the care assistant makes me a cup of tea, or perhaps if I'm incontinent, helps clean me up or otherwise, but I do want a registered nurse to administer my medication. There are times and places where obviously registration is going to be crucially important. So, Mr Speaker, it's important that we do this review. This is not just about putting something off. And it won't be, as the sponsor of this bill has said, us bringing back the exact same bill. Now, Mr Speaker, once this review has been completed and the Minister has looked at it, when we bring back another proposal, perhaps for mandatory social work, it will be comprehensive. There will be a definition, I believe, of what social work is. To simply say a social worker is someone who practices social work is far too broad. It's not going to achieve what we want to. And so, Mr Speaker, at this point in time, I can't support this bill, although we do support the intent of keeping vulnerable New Zealanders safe when they're having social workers practice with them. Thank you.
I call Kevin Haig.